Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you for joining tonight's session. We are going to begin our panel tonight. This is the second of our series, the making of the detention state. And today we're gonna discuss the panel discussed today is disappear, deny, due process. So this is the conversation for tonight. We're going to also have interpretation today. So we're going to give the opportunity to our interpreters to give the announcement, and so everyone who speak who's bilingual hopefully will be able to also access this feature. So I'm going to pass it on to our interpreters for tonight to give us the instructions on how to access the feature.
Thank you, Amilcar. Hi, good evening, everyone. I'm going to do a bilingual announcement, and then after this announcement, the interpretation feature would be turned on. My name is Miguel, and along with my co-interpreter, Ana, we'll be interpreting today's meeting, and we highly encourage everyone who is not bilingual in English and Spanish to make use of the interpretation feature. Hola a todos, mi nombre es Miguel. Hoy voy a estar interpretando junto con mi compañera Ana esta junta. Vamos a estar interpretando simultáneamente y les invitamos a todas las personas que no son bilingües en inglés y en español de por favor usar la función de interpretación. Voy a hacer este anuncio bilingüe y después de esto la función se va a encender. Para acceder a la interpretación una vez que se prenda, si se están uniendo a través de un computador, van a ver un globo terráqueo en la parte de abajo de las herramientas. Seleccionan ese globo, buscan su idioma, lo seleccionan y le aprietan a finalizar o done. Si se están uniendo a través de un dispositivo móvil o una tableta, van a ver tres puntitos en la parte inferior derecha. Le dan clic ahí, buscan la función de interpretación de idiomas, después eligen su idioma y le dan clic a finalizar o done. Si tienen algún problema, por favor nos dejan saber en el chat. So once I'm done with this announcement, interpretation feature will be turned on. Then if you're joining via computer, you're gonna see a globe at the bottom toolbar. Click there, select the language, and then select done or finalize. Then if you're joining via a mobile device, you're gonna see three dots at the bottom right corner. Click there and you're gonna look for the language interpretation feature, select your language, and then click done. If you have any issues with the interpretation, please let us know. And just one last reminder to please make sure that you speak at a moderate pace to make sure that we're able to capture everything that you're saying. Y nomás un recordatorio de por favor cuando hablen, de por favor hablar a una velocidad moderada para que podamos capturar todo lo que están diciendo. Gracias, ahora se va a aprender la interpretación. Thank you all. Now the interpretation feature will be turned on.
Thank you to our interpreters. Thank you so much for your support to make this possible, to make it accessible to our community members who can join this conversation tonight. So we are going to, the feature is already turned on, so you should be able to access it. Maybe we can give a quick thumbs up if someone can hear, if someone is in the Spanish channel, can let us know that it's working properly. Hopefully, perfect. Yes, so it's working. All right. Thank you, everyone. Again, it's really an honor to be part of this conversation today. As I mentioned, this is a series that many of our partners here are organizing this series. So today we're discussing disappear and deny due process. Last week we already had 2 weeks ago we had our first conversation and focus most only on the increase of detention in the state of Georgia, the policies that allow that to happen here in the state of Georgia. We have all these panels. There is a link here for you all to sign up. Once you sign for the first one, you should be able to receive the invitations for the following. So hopefully you're able to join the following series. So thank you so much for joining us tonight. And we're gonna get started. We're gonna pass on to next slides, please. Just wanted to name that this is possible thanks to all incredible organizations and individuals who are really putting a lot of effort to make this happen. Thanks to Advanced Justice, Baji, Casa Alterna, Refugio, Free University, Georgia Detention Watch, Shutdown Folkestone, Project South, Migrant Equity Southeast, Icebreakers, GLAR in the community, Australia. Thank you everyone for joining and for being part of this larger effort to bring this conversation to our community. So thank you everyone for joining. All right, and we have great speakers tonight. Just an honor to be part of this conversation tonight. My name is Amilcar Valencia. I'll be moderating the panel tonight. We have Stephanie Jones Alvarez from the National Immigration Project, who's going to speak about the work that she's currently doing and also how they are supporting people who are unfortunately, denied access. Nan, also who works with Justice in Motion, has tons of experience working with people who have been disappeared in the past, people who have been deported, and bringing justice in the cases of people who were deported back in 2016. We'll speak more about this experience. We also have Meredyth Yoon, who is with Asian American Advanced Justice Atlanta, who's also going to speak about her work with people who unfortunately go through this very specific and horrible thing of being disappeared, sent to a third country. And we also have a Prince, who is one of our people impacted, who also going to speak and share his story with us. All right, excellent. Well, let's begin with our panel tonight. We're going to just give a quick opportunity for our panelists just to introduce themselves, your name, your pronouns. I know we already mentioned the organizations that you're working with, but if you're gonna say something about the current work that you're doing and how that relates to the current reality of mass detention, incarceration, and disappearing of people in our community. So I'll start with Anan, who is the first one in my side of the screen.
Thank you so much. It's such an honor to be here with you all today. And thanks so much to everybody that just showed up tonight. It's really important. So I work at Justice in Motion. Justice in Motion is a migrant rights nonprofit organization based in the US, but we specialize in building collaborations with our network of human rights defenders in Mexico, Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, and Nicaragua. And the mission of our organization is to help individuals access justice in the US when they aren't here anymore. So this is really hard work. We're really standing guard at the edge of the system, trying to make sure that people aren't forgotten. And I mentioned that, we're a national organization, but I have deep roots in Georgia. I've lived in Georgia for almost 20 years, and I work out of my home in Atlanta. So thanks, Amilcar.
Thank you, Nan. Stephanie, you want to go next?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Stephanie Alvarez-Jones, she, her pronouns. I'm the Southeast Regional Attorney at the National Immigration Project. So like Nan and others here, also work in the immigrant justice space. National Immigration Project is kind of, as its name suggests, a national organization. We have folks across the country, but I myself am based here in Atlanta, and my work focuses on kind of detention and enforcement related issues in the Southeast, which can be very broad, but I define as Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and Georgia. The work has in some ways looked the same kind of throughout the many years of kind of immigrant justice work. But in the past year, it's only been a year. Some aspects of the work that we're going to talk about a little bit more have changed. So a lot more, I think, focus on detention and decarceral work.
Excellent.
Prince? Yeah. Oh, sorry, I'll turn it back to you instead of me pinging it back to someone else, Amilcar.
Excellent. We'll go with Meredyth, and then we'll give a little bit of context, and then we'll give opportunity to Prince to go next. So Meredyth, you want to go next?
Yes, thank you so much, everyone. My name is Meredyth Yoon. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a civil rights attorney with Asian Americans Advancing Justice Atlanta. We are based in Georgia in Atlanta and have several affiliates in other parts of the country, Washington, D.C., Chicago, and California. but our office is based in Gwinnett County. Most of our litigation and advocacy focuses on immigrant justice, particularly around issues related to detention and immigration enforcement, both at the federal and state level. We also represent people who are seeking freedom from detention, who are detained primarily in Georgia, um, and we fight for their freedom and also the conditions that they face in detention, and have also represented people who have been subjected to deportations to third countries. And just echoing what others have said, that despite things sort of being constant in the sense of immigration detention being really inhumane, the climate has definitely shifted more recently.
Thank you so much, Meredyth. Thank you, everyone, for again joining this panel and making the time. I know it's busy times with family, and you're spending an hour and a half with us, so we really appreciate it. Thank you so much, and thank you to our panelists for joining us tonight. I'll provide a little bit of context, and we'll introduce our person who is directly impacted, who's going to share his story. And I think for context, we already know what is happening, so it's this very grim reality that we're living to. We know for experience, those especially loved ones, people who are supporting immigrants in detention, advocates, people who provide legal representation, know that it's very difficult to work with someone where you don't know where it is located, right? It's the very fact that the system that we all use to locate someone, an ICE locator, you cannot rely on that system. So people are not only in that first layer of disappear from the system, you don't know where they are, you know how to provide support, and there is the other layers of disappear to a third country, and then we will talk more about that. Disappear to SECAD in El Salvador, or Uganda and other countries, and that brings so many issues for people, right? How you bring justice to someone, how you provide support to someone who is in another country, like they don't have any connections there. You as an advocate, as a lawyer, also don't have a lot of connections there. It makes it very difficult. And I know you have experience. We'll talk about this with the people present in this panel today. But we want to hear specifically from Prince, who is someone who has experienced, disappearance, basically sent to other countries. So I'm going to ask Prince if you can unmute yourself and share a little bit about your story. What were you able to share with us tonight? I'm not sure if he's still here. If Prince, if you can hear us, if you can unmute yourself. And
I think that he got dropped, unfortunately.
dropped. Okay,
I'm trying
so
to
sorry.
reach him through WhatsApp.
Okay,
and see if
hopefully.
he can join. Yeah.
Thank you, Leanne. Hopefully, we're able to establish contact with him. And hopefully, Meredyth can give us some context too, because I know you'll be working directly with him of what it looks like for someone to be disappeared to a third country. What are the challenges that you find working with them? What are the things that they experience themselves? So, what are the things that families experience when someone is, again, sent to a third country, they don't have any connections? What are those challenges that you're seeing right now?
Thanks, Amilcar. And everything that you just mentioned with respect to being taken away from families, not being able to be in contact with your loved ones or have people be able to find you is something that is, one of the just central parts of the cruelty of these deportations to third countries. Since January of 2025, the U.S. has engaged in these third country deportations at a much higher frequency than has ever happened before. And while this is really unique in the sense that it's happening so often and to so many people, It's also not the first time that we've seen this type of disappearance tactic. It's also something that's happening, across Europe. We're seeing border externalization, that is causing people to be deported to third countries, and having their asylum claims outsourced, to other places, which is, causing people to be taken even further away from any type of support, or system that they could expect, when seeking safety from where they're fleeing. In September of 2025, my comrade and client Prince, who hopefully will join the call again soon, um, called me, one morning, and all I could hear at the other end of the line was just this loud crackling, and a very, very faint voice. Um, but finally, I could make out, what the person's voice was saying, and he said, "This is Prince. I'm in Ghana." And at that moment, my stomach just dropped and I felt speechless. Prince, as you know, he may tell you himself when he's back on, is not from Ghana, has no ties to Ghana, um, and just absolutely no reason to think that that is somewhere where he would be deported. Prince is a father, he is a family man, he is a friend and a mentor to many people, and someone who I had the privilege of meeting in a capacity as an organizer with the Shutdown Folkestone ICE Processing Center campaign. While Prince was detained there, my friend Leanne, who's also on this call, introduced Prince to myself and, my colleagues at Asian Americans Advancing Justice, including Sam, who's on this call. And we got to know Prince and learned that he, is from Liberia. He's someone who had to flee, the country that, of his birth when he was very young. And he was granted asylum in the US back in the 1990s and had lived in the US ever since, gotten married, had children, but had been in immigration detention at Folkestone when I met him for about 2 years. A lot of people don't realize that immigration detention is not necessarily something that is just temporary. That when people end up in ICE detention, they can be there for many months or even years, which was the case for Prince. And so we decided, myself and my colleagues, to file a habeas corpus petition for Prince. And we went ahead and filed that. And some time went by, and the status of his immigration case changed, which meant that we had to withdraw our habeas and wait for another 6 months before we would be able to file another one, and be heard, which, was extending his detention even longer than the years he had already been detained. We were prepared once we reached, 6 months to file that habeas for him. And we thought it was probably unlikely that Prince would be deported to Liberia in that time frame because Liberia was not issuing travel documents. So at 6 months, we were planning to try again and try to obtain his freedom. But before we could get to that point, instead, he was deported to Ghana, and that's when I received that phone call. The circumstances of the deportation itself, I would come to find out, are common to third country deportations, but Prince and the others on the flight, there were 14 people, were pulled out of their beds in immigration detention in the middle of the night. They were forced onto a military cargo plane. They were chained. They were treated inhumanely. And they were not told, in many cases, where they were even going until the plane was in the air. There's just a total lack of transparency. There's no notice. There's no opportunity to express concerns or fear of being deported to a third country. Instead, they were just essentially kidnapped and disappeared in the middle of the night to a country where no person on the plane had any ties to whatsoever. Many of the people who were on that flight had won their immigration cases, winning orders of protection, like, for example, under the Convention Against Torture or withholding of removal under the Immigration and Nationality Act, based on the likelihood that they would face persecution or torture if deported to their countries of origin. What DHS, what ICE, what the US government are doing in these instances is they are deporting people to what are sometimes referred to as an arrangement called a transit hub, which is not intended to be a final destination. But what we learned in this case in September was that the people who were sent to Ghana were intended to then be sent on back to the very countries where they had won protection from in US immigration court. As Prince would put it, they were deported to their countries through the back door. The US is using these these third country deportations to basically circumvent its obligations under US law, under international law. And these are called, these deportations through third countries are something called chain refoulement. And it's illegal under international law. It took several days for my colleagues and I to figure out where Prince and the others were. We knew they were in Ghana. We knew they were in a military camp, but really had no sense of where they were. What was described to us was that they were in the middle of nowhere. There were tents, there were armed guards, there were bugs, animals, people were getting sick. They didn't have changes of clothes, and they were given very little information about what was happening while being held against their will by armed guards. So these are the circumstances that people are facing when they're being subjected to these deportations. And disturbingly, they just continue to happen. The US has now entered into agreements with over a dozen different countries for some type of third country deportation arrangement, either prior to adjudication of a person's immigration claim or after the fact, in some cases, even after they won their case. So the challenges with transparency, with lack of access, begin immediately with the flight itself, and then continue, throughout the time, thereafter, where the person is facing refoulement to their country. So those are just some of the challenges that people are facing.
Thank you, Mary, for painting a picture of what is currently happening, and not only how problematic it is that people are just sent to a country without any opportunity to be even connected with loved ones, lawyers, but you mentioned very clear people who have already claims of being survivors of torture or other type of abuse in their home countries, and now they're sending them to the same place. So the egregious abuse of human rights violations that are happening right now is just unprecedented in what I can remember in the current detention history in the United States. So thank you for sharing this. We'll see if Prince is able to join and share a few words with us and give us a larger understanding of what is currently happening. I'd like to also bring the conversation to, you mentioned something very clear. This is not something new. It happened before. It had happened in, It's happening in other courts as well, in other parts of the world. But seeing it and see in plain sight, and I know we are sharing some resources in the chat, how this administration, this regime is affecting and impacting the lives of those who are currently trying to hold in the little hope that they have to stay here, and then they ship them to a third country. I'm going to bring Nan into the conversation. I know you and your organization have been working very hard, and this is probably goes several years back because, as I said, this is not something new. The first Trump administration implemented so many horrible policies, and one of them was family separation, zero tolerance. We all, remember those, stories in the news and how families were separated at the border, kids separated, parents sent to a detention center, and then deported, and kids were just disappeared. Right? No one provided any information. And I know there's still those cases ongoing. Now, you've been working very closely with families, trying to bring some justice to those cases. Please illustrate a little bit more what it looks like for you. What are the challenges that someone experienced after deportation?
Well, thanks so much, Amilcar. When I was listening to Meredyth talk, I was, I kind of can't believe that Trump won a second time. We knew what this second administration would be like because we all saw what he did in the first administration. The family separation policy was a horrific policy that separated kids from their caregivers when they were recently arriving to the US. A lot of you probably remember the images and the sounds from that time. What I can say is it's causing generational trauma in those families. And so we know the harm that these policies cause. We saw it before, and unfortunately, now we're seeing it again. Just taking us back to 2017, 2018, when parents and children were forcibly separated, we worked on a case in very close collaboration with other legal services organizations, including the American Civil Liberties Union, or the ACLU, who was litigating the case. And the reason we got involved was because of our network of human rights defenders, particularly those in Guatemala and in Honduras. They started to hear about and meet parents who were deported without their kids. This is pre-zero tolerance. So they were doing it before the zero tolerance policy was put into effect, right? So we kind of were read into this situation because of our people on the ground in Central America. Once the zero tolerance policy was put into place in April of 2018, of course, the whole world kind of woke up to what was happening, and it happened in a much grander scale. And what I want just to say is that when families were separated, the government had no intention to reunite them. They only, we were only able to make gains because there was a lawsuit that had been filed, and the presiding judge ordered the government to reunite the families. Deterrence by cruelty was the point. I think the government assumed that by deporting families, they wouldn't have to deal with them anymore. Because the government was ordered to reunite the families, we were able to learn the scope of what happened. And over 1,000 parents were deported without their kids after they were separated from their kids. We were able to get information about the families from the government. The information was very bad, very incomplete, wrong, old, stale. So it was very, very difficult to reach the parents or even know where they were. We had to deploy several dozen human rights defenders to literally walk around rural areas in Mexico and Central America, searching for the families, making sure they were in touch with their children, and connecting them with reunification pathways that were available because there was this lawsuit. What compounded the challenge was that many of the families who were migrating to flee harm. And so they couldn't return to the place where they were from. So even though we might have had the place of birth or the last known address of the family, we really needed a human rights defender to follow the trail and be, an investigator, right? And knock on doors. Family reunification has taken advocacy at all of the levels. There had to be massive public awareness, public outcry. There was impact litigation, and of course, individual representation. We've been chipping away at the problem, trying to atone for the horrors that happened more than 8 years ago. We've worked on over 1,000 cases, eventually through a settlement agreement. We did receive a class-wide remedy of humanitarian parole. But even though hundreds of families were able to reunite, the Trump administration now has been trying to chip away at those gains and to renege on the promises that they made during the settlement agreement. So we've been back in court for the past 6 months, trying to force the government to comply with the terms of the settlement agreement. The reason why I'm explaining the detail about everything that's happened is so folks appreciate the effort that it takes to monitor the human rights abuses post-deportation and to deliver some semblance of justice and healing to individuals who've suffered at the hands of our government. The case of the families separated under the zero tolerance policy, in a way, was primed to succeed due to the sustained and consistent public outrage, which was made simpler because this was one modality of a cruel immigration enforcement policy to separate newly arriving guardians and their children at one location, the border, right? The southern US border. The nationalities were also clustered. Most of the people affected were from Central America, and the majority who were returned back to the place where they came from. What we're seeing now is far more chaotic. It's moved from the US border to our neighborhoods. Because it's in the interior, it's affecting locations throughout the US. The individuals who are impacted sometimes are targeted, sometimes they're not. And mostly they've been here a while. And so we're talking about people who have deep ties in their communities. And by all accounts, conditions and detention centers are worsening. Many nationalities of individuals are involved. And now we have this phenomenon that Meredyth talked about, which is sending people to third countries where there are very little to no resources. So these are times that are challenging for our advocate community. We really need everybody to keep paying attention and to stay invested. We need to cohere around resisting all of these policies, especially when folks are deported or disappeared. We need to understand that atoning for what's been going on in our name is going to be very difficult, right? The government knows this, and frankly, that's why they're doing it. So, we really need to be collaborating with civil society and the human rights community and the rest of the world and have solidarity with people. And I'm going to leave it there.
Thank you, Nan. And so, incredible to hear. Again, I think it's important that somebody put this in the chat. Like we still, amazed that this happened, right? Many, after we've seen all these horrible things happening to the first administration, we're dealing with so much now in the arbitrary detention of individuals. I think that leads to a very good segue to talk about that specific, like how people now are being targeted by this administration to funnel as many people to this deportation machine and send them to third countries and send people far, far away from community, from support. So people don't have access to justice. So people don't have ability to even tell the stories. Like the very fact that we had someone impacted in this conversation today and he's not able to even join the conversation, right? It's just that, it makes it so hard to even give the voice to those who are directly impacted, and let alone when they're just sent to a prison, right? And which is what Stephanie can definitely illuminate a little more in the context of sending people to El Salvador, for example. I mean, I think we all heard the stories about, Kilmar sent to El Salvador, but there were so many other people who were sent to El Salvador, Venezuelans, people from other countries too, during, the early years of the summer last year. And then you've been working, Stephanie, with people impacted as a COT. How incredible difficult could be finding that, your client or, someone that you've been supporting, trying to figure out how they can, be released here in the United States. And then you find out that that person is actually sent to SECOT, a jail maximum prison facility that has more than 40,000 beds in El Salvador, which the president of El Salvador has said that no one leaves a cot, and that it's a grim reality for many people. So can you tell us more what that looks like for you, providing support for someone who is sent to Secot, and what kind of stories you can share with us?
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Amilcar. So I think I'll just note at the start that kind of the daily horrors that we see in terms of just these accelerated deportations, the expanded scale of the deportations, the expanded use of like really summary processes like expedited removal, like these are daily horrors that thousands upon thousands of our neighbors and community members are being subjected to. Um, and I think deserve the same kind of outrage that, some of these like really emblematic and horrific stories that, Nan and Meredyth and like the Sakat example, I think also deserve. Um, and I also want to highlight something that Nan said that, right, like the family separation kind of policy and effort, it was designed and that cruelty was the point, right? Like it was supposed to be so awful to be separated from your child that, people wouldn't be coming to the United States, right? They would be deterred from fleeing harm. And that has been very much the approach with the sending of the 252 men in March of last year to Sikot, right? This like infamous prison that um, you know, where torture is regularly meted out and where, right, like the government itself is very proud that no one leaves there alive. Um, and so, yeah, the cruelty is the point of being sent to a torture prison. And I think also a little bit to kind of like this same version of what like Nan and both Meredyth were talking about, it's also like the arbitrariness, right? Like it's not anyone in particular, right? It's not people that have been accused and then convicted of really horrendous crimes. It's just people, right? Like it is just people seeking safety in the United States, people seeking opportunity in the United States. And so here we had 252 men. Several of them were actually previously detained at Stewart Detention Center, which is one of the two main like long-term detention centers here in Georgia. And then were transferred to Texas, which is where the kind of the administration gathered all 252 of the men, and then sent them to Secot. Um, the 252 were all Venezuelans. Um, Most, if not all, thought they were being deported home. It was only when they were arriving in El Salvador that they, realized that they actually weren't at home, right? They thought they were getting, deported, and some of them were being fearful of returning back to a country to which they fled, and others had spent already so much time in detention in the United States that they were just happy to be finally, they thought getting out and returning back home and just kind of figuring out their lives from there. But, I think instead, right, the images are kind of very, very well circulated and that these men arrived in El Salvador. They were told that they were never getting out. They were all accused of being members of, this gang called Tren de Aragua with no evidence, right? The only basis for that accusation was the fact that these guys all had tattoos. And some of them were really incredibly innocuous tattoos. Um, but two of my clients and these 252 guys were sent to Secot in March of 2025. When they arrived there, they were told that the only way out is in a body bag. They were tortured regularly. Um, I think there was also press around that sometimes delegations came to visit. Christy Nome even went to Sikot and toured the facility and took pictures in front of the guys. And those were the days that everyone was kind of given access to soap, right, and cleaned up and able to kind of look a little bit better for the cameras. But otherwise, it was a routine of torture until and meanwhile, right, there was this, there's ongoing litigation. We had some litigation here in Georgia, in Meredyth referred to like these habeas proceedings, which is a challenge to the legality of someone's detention. And there was a broader litigation in DC around like these flights sending the guys to Sikot. Um, and this entire time, right, the US government had been saying, well, I'm so sorry, these guys are out of our hands now. Once the minute they arrived in El Salvador, like that's El Salvador's problem. This is all El Salvador's doing. But nevertheless, in July, we suddenly got the news, and we learned, like I learned from the TV, and like Twitter and Blue Sky, that the U.S. and Venezuela and El Salvador had struck a deal for the release of these like 252 guys, and so they were ultimately um, all sent back to Venezuela and are now trying to rebuild their lives, trying to deal with the incredibly uncertain situation that is in Venezuela right now, while also dealing with the after effects of experiencing torture for many months. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Stephanie, for providing just more context of what happened to people when they were sent to SECAD, but also the torture, the daily torture that people experience in this jail. I know that we're sharing more resources in the chat for people to also click and review. Please don't leave the conversation yet. And I think all the things that we have. I mean, we have heard from Meredyth, who worked directly with Prince, someone who was sent to a third country, the families who were sent to separated from at the border and sent to their home countries, and then kids to stay here, and the work that Nan is doing through through the justice in motion to bring some justice, and just all the stories that we're hearing of the incredible abuse and neglect that happens in this detention centers, and of course the lack of procedure, the lack of justice for people, the lack of access in general. So in this context, how your particular work, your organizations bring justice to people in this context? What are the things that can be done, or you're doing at this time to bring justice to our community members who now again are in this very difficult situation of finding themselves deported, maybe to their home country, maybe to a third country, and then their loved ones are here, maybe their loved ones are disappeared too. How you provide justice, how you work to give justice to those community members. So I'll open up to anyone who wants to start.
I can go first, Amilcar. So we are currently working on a post-deportation support strategy, supporting with resources members of the Justice in Motion Human Rights Defender Network in certain locations in Mexico and Central America, to be available to meet with individuals post-deportation to monitor the conditions that they suffered during arrest, detention, deportation, and offer a legal screening. And the idea here is to not only help connect a deported individual with local resources if it exists, but to also identify and document rights violations and potentially offer legal advice and representation to try to seek some sort of justice after the fact. But it does take time. And I think that's sort of my message here, is that we are in a situation where for every story you hear that is in the news, there are hundreds, dare I say, thousands of more individuals whose rights are being violated, who you don't hear about. And so it is going to take a lot of time and effort within the advocate community. And I include all of you here on this call, not only the lawyers, but community advocates, frontline people, to bear witness and to document so that we can have an accounting. We can have an accounting and try to help people get justice. Yeah, I'll just leave it at that and invite my other panelists to jump in.
Yeah, I think, justice looks a little bit, it looks different for different folks, right? Sometimes we can intervene, and justice is getting someone out of detention when they're detained unlawfully, right? Um, or sometimes justice is, again, speaking kind of as a lawyer, but it's suing and trying to stop one of the many, many different unlawful like policies or, rule changes that this administration is trying to do or is doing. Um, and sometimes justice happens after the fact, right? Like sometimes justice is, you know, delayed in that we can only intervene after folks have been deported, right? And that sometimes looks like just bringing awareness and advocacy, and sometimes that looks like in spaces like this now. It's, bringing sometimes lawsuits again, either like for damages, which was kind of what happened in the family separation context a couple years ago, or again, challenges to the unlawful policies that they are subjected to. So I think it takes a lot of different forms, but again, like to Nan's point, no justice can happen if it's happening in a silo or without awareness of the general public, and it can only really be right something that can help change if our communities and our neighbors are similarly enraged and talking about it.
Very much signal boosting everything that Nan and Stephanie shared, and agree that litigation is one avenue to try. We did sue when we found out Prince was deported to Ghana to stop the further deportation of people back to their countries where they had been granted orders of protection. But one of the challenges of the third country deportations is it's a way for DHS and the US government to avoid accountability because of jurisdictional, blocks basically on being able to, for a court to be able to do anything about it. Now, that's not always going to be the case. Um, there have been successful efforts through litigation to stop these third country deportations through individual habeas petitions, temporary restraining orders. Advocacy is another route or option. More recently, the U.S. has been starting to deport people to Equatorial Guinea as a third country. And they're being held against their will. We were able to get a meeting with staffers with the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and get on a call, on a video call with several of the men and women who are being held in Equatorial Guinea against their will, as well as their family members in the U.S. And even though the committee staffers can't do much right now, um, it it was it was the opportunity to be heard about what this government is subjecting people to, and the reactions on the staffers' faces to see them realize and really hear directly from directly impacted people. We had met with them a few times, and this was the first time I could see it really sinking in. So looking toward the future, and hoping for, a time when things are not quite as bad, with respect to immigration enforcement, always looking toward future roads back to try to scale back what's been done.
Thank you both, the two of you, for sharing more details of what you're doing and some ideas on what can be done, to bring some justice to people. And I know some, when it comes, as you probably already mentioned, in the legal space, it takes time, but there is also things that you could do, as you mentioned, some of them, Meredyth, in terms of the advocacy that can be done also to support people. We're going to move on to our next part of this conversation today. We're going to actually open up for quick breakout rooms, and then we'll come back later on. There is some questions for us to discuss in the breakout rooms that are going to appear in the screen soon, so you can check out the questions. Please don't leave. I really highly encourage people to stay to be part of the conversation. One of the things I wanted to do here is not just hearing about what is happening, but also maybe you have experience or you have some questions or things that other people in this room can provide some support on how to deal with these things. I know there are some questions in the chat. Thank you everyone for participating and bringing those questions. We're gonna have some Q&A at the end as well, but we're going to move on to the breakout rooms. Our team who are working in the backstage, and they're gonna help us to activate the breakout rooms. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for staying, and I hope the conversation in your group was really good. I wanted to hear from some of you. We have about 5 minutes to get to this part of the panel today. So I'd like to just invite to anyone who would like to bring some of that conversation back to the whole group, whether you're able to get through some of those questions or anything that stood out for you in that group. So I'll open up the floor for everyone.
Well, I can share something from Group 6, although our Spelman student, Kayla Hawkins, probably has more. But we agreed to bear witness, to speak out. We knew a little bit coming in to this learning session, and we all agreed we knew a whole lot more now. And two of our people strongly reinforced that they want us to be quiet. So we agreed one of the things we learned the most about was the third country and the lack of and the reasons behind doing the third country, and that we could talk about that because we had learned enough, and it would make a difference in community a lot better than if we just hushed about it.
Thank you so much, Christine, for sharing that. That was just amazing that you hearing from your reflections from your group. Somebody else?
I can jump in. Is that okay?
Go
Okay.
ahead.
There were three of us. We were at first a little lonely, wondering if more would come. But both people said that, two of the folks said that one of the main reasons they were in this meeting was they wanted to know more, like in terms of the questions that were posed to us. That's why they were here, to find out more about that and to talk how they can connect. And we talked about ways to connect to their local communities where they are with community groups. So that might be something that might be able to be addressed. And one of them had broad experience from working with icebreakers in Alabama in the past, and back in COVID days. But I think there was that desire to connect with local groups.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. Hopefully that was also a part of our goal, right? The open up the room as well, just to open the opportunity for people to get to know each other, see what everybody is doing, and how to support our community who are, hurting at this time. We have time for one more, and then we'll move on to the next section. So one more person who would like to unmute themselves and share it with us.
One thing that I wanted to that we talked about a little bit that I brought up is how it's sometimes it's hard to find these groups in our areas, like despite everyone doing so much all over the place. I didn't know about a lot of these groups in my area until just very recently, and I stumbled into them by accident because I was trying to start my own thing. And instead, I instantly found a very large group of people partially because they're scared and they should be, right, not scared, but they're worried that certain people will find them and prosecute them for stepping up and speaking out. But also, it's just kind of hard to get the word out there where people will share with all the algorithms on all the websites and everything. How that works.
Thank you. Yeah, I completely understand that. But the important again to come up, and sometimes we think that we had to, come up with the solutions, right? And just build things from scratch. And it's good to know that there is already a powerful community of people already doing something. I mean, there is just a lot of wealth of knowledge in these organizations that are represented here today, the organizations that have been doing this work for a long time. I myself work for Refugio. We work with people who are detained at Stewart. Many of our friends who are here at AAAJ, anyone else who's organizing around detention at Folkestone. There is so much happening, right? That there's the social circle. So there's just a lot of opportunities to engage. And it's just incredible to see. I think going back to what Christine mentioned, like they want us to be silenced. They want us to, be afraid and don't do anything about what is happening. But I think this is a powerful showing of solidarity and in hope too that things can change when people organize, when people come together. And that I think is a good segue to my last question for our panelists. I know we're dealing with so much in this time. The brutality that we see on the streets, the brutality we're seeing in detention centers, how our community members are attacked on the streets again, on the workplace, everywhere. And it is hard to see a future, a near future where this violence will stop, right? But I know that we can do it, and I know the power of community. But for you particularly, Nan, Stephanie, and Meredyth, what gives you hope in these days?
Since you said my name first, I'll go. Two things. The first are community with my neighbors in my neighborhood. That gives me hope. I feel like, making sure I know who's in my community, that we're looking out for each other. And I just really encourage us to kind of think micro level, right? That gives me hope. And then the second thing is the exact opposite, which is to think globally. One of the blessings of my work is that it's international. And so I have the opportunity to collaborate with human rights defenders throughout the region. And I can tell you that many of them have been advocating for their communities in very hostile environments where their governments violate the law with impunity and have their whole careers. And so their perspective and their resolve to, teach us and to accompany cross-border cases just has been very inspiring to me. So I take hope from international solidarity movements. And so those two things, being very micro and then being global. So I think the overall theme is connection. Connection gives me hope.
Thank you so much, Nan, for wonderful inspiration words. I'll pivot to Stephanie this time.
I think, and maybe this is a little bit odd to say, but I think seeing how angry people are getting, seeing what has happened in Minnesota, I think has been horrifying, but also um, really inspiring. It gives me hope that, I think sometimes the language and what we're seeing happening can get hidden in by talking about like this is legal, right? And what we're seeing this administration do is changing what is legal and still finding these like quote unquote legal ways to do these things, right? Like the third country deportation stuff, a lot of that like is in the law. It just hasn't been used before, but it is in the law. And I'm finding hope in that. I think there's a little, I've seen like a shift in like this may be the law, but it is morally wrong, right? And I think that people are taking notice of this distinction, and just saying like this is just wrong, and they are participating in kind of right in that like in their micro ways, in the broader ways, like forming these connections. And so, yeah, my hope is in that people are recognizing the wrongs that are happening and just saying that, I'm not okay with this and speaking up in their own individual ways.
Thank you so much. Meredith?
I think what gives me hope is um, really bearing witness to how much people care about each other. Um, Detention and deportation is designed to be an isolating, lonely experience that just sucks away a person's hope and will to continue. And um, I've seen that so many times. And I've also seen um, people fight back against that by caring about each other and taking care of each other. We have friends and comrades in the movement who have formerly been detained, who organized, within detention and were able to push back against the abuses they were facing on the inside, were able to connect with the community on the other side of the wall and in the broader world. Were able to speak together loudly enough that the whole world could hear. And, toward the end of the first Trump administration, all the time on the news, I would see people, videos of people organizing together from inside of immigration detention, and telling the world about it. Through these third country deportations, many of the people who are being subjected to this horrific treatment are from West Africa. And there are, many people are detained at some of the same detention centers like Eloy in Arizona or Otero in New Mexico. And several weeks ago, after two third country flights took place back to back, one to Cameroon and one to Equatorial Guinea. Some of the people who were detained together at Eloy, communicated through advocates, through lawyers, to find each other, and check on each other and find where each other are. So, even despite being in the midst of, going through this horrible thing, people find a way to reach out and reach their hand out to their comrade and say, I care about you. I'm checking on you. How are you doing? What happened to you? And to bear witness to people seeing like, oh, someone's checking on me. They know where I am. I know where they are. It's beautiful that people are so interconnected in this way. And even from, you know, military camps, on the other side of the planet, or behind the walls of an immigration detention center in New Mexico, people are able to stay connected with each other, just like Nan said. And that's really beautiful.
Thank you so much. I mean, I just heard so inspiring, so many inspiring things right now about connecting, at the micro level, connecting with your neighbors, know who they are, organize, protect your community, right? Also use that rage that we have, that we're seeing, that is mobilizing so many people, and keep that going, right? And most importantly, as you mentioned also, Meredith, how we can learn from the organizing from the inside, how to support people who are detained. They are putting their own bodies, on the line at risk of being, again, sent to a third country, put in solitary confinement, all these things, right? And I think it's just incredible to see how inspiring that it is. Unfortunately, we have to live in this time where those things had to come up, right? But that speaks to the level of love and care that people have, and we can learn so much from there. So thank you so much to you all for that. We have about 6 minutes for questions from the audience. I think there is a few questions about how to connect, how to work with this, but I'm gonna invite others. If no one unmute themselves, we can give a few minutes for folks to do that. But there is a few questions about bearing witness and what can we do. In the meantime, we're also inviting people to join the next sessions. The next one is on February 23rd. So the link is there for you to register. We'd love to also pass the word to others to join the session. So let's see. There is one more question about, so anyone who wants to speak about how to connect, what can we do? Follow the money, how we follow the money, what is, paid to the 12 country deportations, like what that looks like. I guess that's the question. How we find out, how it's been, information that can be shared about that would be important. So anyone who has
Yeah,
anything
on the kind of on the last question on the money piece, I know Sam had shared the link earlier, but I'm going to drop it again. The Third Country Deportation Watch is collecting kind of this data. And some pieces are publicly reported, and sometimes it's just really harder to see that. But like one example there, most recently, as far as I know, right, Palau, which is a very tiny island nation in the Pacific, they just signed a third country agreement with third country deportation agreement with the United States. And right, like the benefit to them is that they get $7.5 million in agreement for taking individuals to this like very small island nation. So I think that's an idea, right, of like some of the negotiations and some of the like incentives that the US government is using.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Stephanie. So invite anyone who would like to unmute themselves and post a question to our panelists. We still have a few minutes.
Regarding that that payment, was there some transparency? Is there somewhere we could see something like that? Is it on the spending.gov or whatever?
That one I'm not sure. Sometimes these like memorandums of agreement are published after the fact by the State Department, if it's the State Department negotiating these agreements. Like for example, that's actually where like some of the agreements with El Salvador about like the deportations to Sicat were published. It's part of just like general like kind of like public like information release that they sometimes think flies under the radar. And then if you know where to look, right, you can find it. And yeah, highlighting track the transactional record clearinghouse is a great resource for like immigration related data.
Excellent.
Thank you, Stephanie. We have 2 more minutes, so one more question before we close up.
I had a question, if possible. I was just wondering if there was like one takeaway that you would want us to take to our community, people who like maybe aren't paying a ton of attention to like what's going on. They don't understand, like that there's these third deportations, people are being held in other countries, and we're trying to communicate to them like the reality of the situation. I guess what's a takeaway from your work that you would want, I guess, like the layman to know?
Anyone would like to get started on this question? It's an excellent question. Thank you, Andres, for posting that question. I would say that I'll start and then hopefully others can chime in. It is super important, especially for those who are impacted, maybe fearful of being detained or, even they're already in detention and fear for being, sent to other country. Communicating with the family as much as soon as possible. Don't sign any documents that are provided to them. I know ICE lies all the time, and forces people to do things that shouldn't be, done. But that happens all the time. I know finding legal support, legal resources is very difficult finding, especially here in the state of Georgia. But AAAJ, GAIN, the city of Atlanta are providing some legal support for people who are in deportation proceedings. So if people don't have the capacity to find an attorney for themselves, both these organizations, Refugio, also can make a referral for community members. Just to speak on the reality of finding support that can give you more information of what to do, what to expect when you're already in the deportation proceedings. But I don't know if Nan or Meredyth has anything else to add.
Only thing I would add is I don't know if your question was about the an affected community or just the general population. And I think people should care about third country deportations because it takes individuals farther away from our justice system that should protect them, right? And so it's really making it harder and harder for accountability and for the rule. It's bad for the rule of law, it's bad for our democracy to take people so far away, even non-citizens. So that's just my general population advice.
I guess I would say, I don't know if this is the one thing, but it's what I'm thinking about right now with these third country deportations is, um, I think it's important for people to know about it and care. I agree, Nan. And the fact that the border, the so-called border, basically exists everywhere now. It can be externalized to anywhere in the world as we push asylum seekers and people seeking safety out to other places where we maybe can't see them. Um, the border comes, into the interior of the U.S. when we see CBP and Border Patrol, in U.S. cities, shooting and killing people who are exercising their First Amendment rights or bearing witness. Um, and if the border can be everywhere, um, what is it even? Um, it's, I'm just going to leave it. I'm just going to leave it at that.
Thank you so much. That is the time we have for this conversation today. Again, I want to thank you everyone for joining today's session. There is more of these series coming up. So the 23rd is the next one. So make sure that you sign up. Thank you to Nan, Stephanie, Meredyth for making the time, for providing your expertise, sharing the stories. We continue to think about Prince, who is now sent to another country, and continue to think about the people in our communities who are facing this cruel system of detention and deportation. So thank you so much, everyone. There is many ways to plug in with the organizations that are presented here. I know we share some resources. Refugio, it's an organization that provides support for people detained at Stewart. So the link is also in the chat. We'll send more information following the webinar. There is so much organizing happening around Folkestone. Next week, there is a visual at Dayton Detention Center at 2 p.m. We'll be posting that information in our social media. So we'll hope people can join us and to honor the lives of those who also have died in detention. I think that is very clear and important thing to name, that there are people who are forever disappear, right, in the detention system, the people who died in immigration detention, of course. And just recently we have someone who died here in one of the detention centers at Dayton Detention Center. So invite everyone to join us on next Saturday, the 14th at 2 p.m. at Dayton Detention Center. Follow any of those organizations will be posting on social media about the vigil. And of course, join us on the 23rd for the third series of our conversation, The Making of the Detention State. So thank you, everyone. There is a link already in the chat for the vigil, so make sure that you can, go to the post and then find out more details there. Thank you so much, everyone. Good evening.